Hi everyone, welcome to my session for Azure Back to School 2025. Today we're going to be having a look at a tool called Copacetic and how we can use that to keep our container workloads secure. My name's Sam, I'm a Cloud Solutions Architect for Microsoft, and I talk regularly about things like Azure, Cloud, Infrastructure as Code, and all those sort of topics. And you can find lots more content if you're interested in the links in the slide shown here. So today we're going to talk about a tool called Copacetic, or in short, Copa. And this is a tool that can help us secure and patch our container-based workloads. But before we dive into how that all works, let's look a bit closer at what the actual problem is. So our focus today is mainly going to be on container workloads that you are getting from third parties. And so most container-based environments, Kubernetes, AKS, those sort of things, you will be running images that have come from third parties. These might be images you're running directly on your AKS cluster, so things like Cert Manager, Nginx Ingress Controller, Istio, all those sort of things that you might actually just run directly as a service on your cluster. But secondly, you're also going to be bringing in third-party images when you build your own applications, because you'll be using them as a base image. Unless you're using distroless blank images, you will be bringing in a third-party image of some sort to then build your application on top of. Because we're relying on these images that come from a third party, we have potential for security problems, ranging from simple issues with the fact that there may be vulnerabilities on the image that haven't been patched, all the way up to things like supply chain attacks where a third party has been compromised and the images we're getting are actually containing malicious content. And so this is something we need to be able to deal with and to be able to manage in our environment so that we are not running insecure images. One area that talks about this is the Microsoft Container Secure Supply Chain Framework. And we're not going to go into this in massive detail in this session, but I wanted to highlight the first couple of stages, which is going to be important when we come to talking about where we use Copa. Because the easiest way to use third-party images is just to use them directly from wherever the third party hosts them. So pull them in directly from their container registry, use a Helm chart that the third party supplies them, which will pull in their images directly. But then we have a risk because we are reliant on those third parties and those images are running directly from the third party. If they are vulnerable or if they are compromised, there's nothing in our process that will stop that getting into our cluster. And so the recommended approach instead is that you should be bringing those images into a registry that you own and maintain so that you can properly secure those images. You can run a container scan to make sure they're not full of vulnerabilities or malicious code, but you can also then patch those images and you can deal with any vulnerabilities that come along. And this is important because with the best will in the world, a third party, particularly some open source providers who are building images, are not going to be able to patch vulnerabilities the day they come out. You will find that vulnerabilities that come out for images will get patched eventually, but you could have a matter of days or even weeks between when they've been announced and when the third party actually patches those images. If you are following this secure supply chain framework and you're pulling in those images from the third party and you're scanning them, your scans are going to start to fail because those vulnerabilities are present. And now you're at a point where you say, well, because we have to follow this process, we can't release our application or we can't update our third party service until the third party patches those images for us. And that could take a while. And so now you're running potentially insecure images while you wait for that. And so this is where Copa comes in. Copa is a tool that will allow us to take those third party images, scan them for vulnerabilities, and then patch those vulnerabilities ourselves rather than having to wait for the third party to do it. So the way Copa works is a two-part process. Firstly, it's going to scan the image using some sort of vulnerability scanner, and the default and built-in one is using Trivy. There are a couple of extensions you can use to use other scanners, but the default approach is to use Trivy. Trivy will then report on what vulnerabilities are present in the container image, and Copacetic will use that output to go and patch the image by adding an additional layer on top of the existing image with the appropriately patched files for the vulnerable files. It will then produce a new container image with that patched layer on top of it that you can then use as the image you then distribute out to your clusters and to your users. And that image isn't vulnerable. It's a non-destructive approach. It will not overwrite the existing image. It will create a new image that you can then distribute. And it will work easily so that when the third-party vendor then does fix those images and you pull that in again, the process will just run again, and you will see there are no vulnerabilities and Copa won't have to do anything. So it's a case of you can deal with it yourself until the third party patches those vulnerabilities, and then you can move on and use their version when that's ready. And so it's a really useful tool to help ensure that your images are always patched and not vulnerable. Now, obviously, this only applies to vulnerabilities that actually do have fixes. If there are unfixed vulnerabilities, you're still in the same position you would be without running Copa. It can't magically fix unfixed vulnerabilities, but it will deal with any fixed ones for you. This then means you can put that patched image into your golden registry that your consumers are going to use, and they never even see the unpatched version that has the vulnerabilities because the only place that existed was in your process. You can do this manually. There's a CLI tool we're going to have a look at in a minute about how you can use Copa to patch those images. But we can also build this into our pipelines. Okay, so let's have a look at Copa in action. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to do this from the command line. So I've got two tools installed. I've installed the Copa executable, and I've also installed Trivy. You can look at the GitHub repos of both of these tools for instructions on how to get them installed, both just command line tools. And so first things first, let's have a look at using Trivy to scan the image. This is more for our purposes, just to see the image's vulnerabilities. Copa will do the Trivy part for you for actually patching. So we're going to run Trivy against this Nginx image that I know has some vulnerabilities on it. It's an old version of the image. We'll run Trivy, and you can see that it's spat out a report which has a large number of vulnerabilities, including some high and critical vulnerabilities that we really wouldn't want to be running in our environment. And so what we're going to now do is use Copa to actually patch the image. And so it's a pretty simple command line command. We're just going to run the Copa command line with the -i parameters to specify the image we want it to patch. And that's all the information we need. We'll run that, and you can see Copa is running through the image, looking for vulnerabilities, and then patching those vulnerabilities and creating a new image for us. You can see it's created a new version of the image with a -patched extension on the end of it, so it's a separate image. And what we can then do is we'll run Trivy again against that patched image, and you can see that there are no vulnerabilities on that image. That image is now clean and ready for use. The second way we can run Copa, and the one I'd recommend if you want to be running this on a regular basis, is to use some sort of CI/CD pipeline. We're going to use GitHub Actions in our demo, but you could do this in Azure DevOps, Jenkins, whatever tool you want to use. But this is the way I would do it if you want to run import of images on a regular basis. So in a real world scenario where you're using a third-party image within your cluster, let's say you're running a Cert Manager within your cluster, they're obviously going to be releasing new versions of that container image on a regular basis. And so you need to be importing that image into your golden registry and scanning and patching it on a regular basis as well. Doing that manually through the CLI is not really going to cut it. So ideally, you want to create some pipelines that will do this for your commonly used images that people can then consume. And the pipeline can pull that image in, it can scan it, it can fix the images, and it can then push them into your registry all for you. And you can maybe run that once a week, or you can even do some work to actually detect new versions of an image from the third party and only trigger it then as well. That's entirely possible. So what we've got here is a GitHub action, and this is set up using a matrix job so that you can feed in a number of different images you want to pull in the same job, and it will run the same pipeline for each job. Here, I've only got one image, the Python one we did before, but you could add multiples in there. And what it's doing is the same as we did from the CLI, really, but as a part of the pipeline. So the first thing it does is it goes and does a Trivy scan. The purpose of doing this beforehand is one, so that we can create the report for Copa to use, but also it checks to see if there are any vulnerabilities. So if we have an image that is free of vulnerabilities and doesn't need to go through this patching, then we stop the pipeline there. And we just finish it up and say, yeah, the image is ready to go. If there are vulnerabilities, we then run Copa, which will then patch the image for us. Once the patching is finished, we've got that patched image. We will then push that into our registry. In the case of this pipeline, it's using the GitHub container registry. We'll push that image into the registry, and then people can then consume that image. So that's what the YAML's doing. If we have a look on GitHub, this is our pipeline. Again, you can see it's using that matrix. We've only got one job here. We click on that. That'll take us into the actual pipeline. And you can see the steps, as mentioned. When we look to the YAML, we're doing the Trivy scan, we're doing the Copa patching, and then we are pushing the image into the container registry. I can run that pipeline whenever I want, and it will go and fetch the appropriate image and go through all that process for me, and I can automate that. And then obviously, if you have lots of images, you can do that for all of them and have a fully automated process that pulls those images in. And the only time you would necessarily need to be aware of what's going on is if it failed, because there is vulnerabilities that Copa perhaps can't patch, and they fail your scanners and so on. And that's when you'd have to manually intervene. But if everything does its job, you should get images coming out the end that are free of vulnerabilities. Your scanner should pass, and everything should be fully automated. So there's a very quick overview of Copa and what it can do. I think you'll agree that it can be a really useful tool where you're using a lot of third-party images and you don't want to have to wait or use vulnerable images when vulnerabilities appear. It's a pretty quick and easy tool to use. It's easy to integrate into your CI/CD pipelines and just run it every time. And it will ensure that your images are kept patched and vulnerability-free as much as possible. Hopefully you found this session useful and you'll consider introducing Copacetic into your workflow. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.